Hello, good evening. Welcome to the ET CEO Dialogues presented by SAP. Thank you all for joining. It's really wonderful to have all of you, all the panelists here. Thank you all very much for agreeing to be part of this discussion and enriching us. All the attendees who are joining us to listen to this discussion, deep appreciation for the fact that you're taking time out to come and join us and listen in. Thank you all very, very much. Today we have with us top leaders from the Indian power sector. We will be talking about accelerating shifts in power generation and transmission. And my name is Alokesh Bhattacharya. I'm senior editor of the Economic Times, and I'm joined by my colleague Suchetna.
Hello, everyone. I'm Suchetna Ray, senior assistant editor with the Economic Times. Thank you very much for joining today's discussion, for taking the time out today. And we really hope that we'll have a very strong discussion today about the changing trends that we are seeing in the Indian power sector.
And who better to talk about changing trends in the power sector than the panel that we have here today? Let's have a quick round of introductions. We have with us Vinod Kumar Singh, the CMD of Northeastern Electric Power Corporation Limited, or NEEPCO. Mr. V. Ponuraj, Managing Director of Karnataka Power Corporation Limited, or KPCL. Mr. N.S. Parameswaran, Executive Director, Design, E&M and Commercial of NHPC.
We also have with us P. Ramesh, CMD of Rajasthan Rajya Vidyut Utpadan Nigam, or RRVUN. We have with us Mr. Sunil Jain, CEO of Hero Future Energies, Vineet Mishra, Director EY India.
And last but not the least, we also have with us Rajiv Singh, who is the Vice President, Strategic Industries, SAP Indian Subcontinent. It's great to have all of you with us here today. Looking forward to a really very strong debate. Thank you. We already have more than 200 people in the audience who have logged in. It's great to have this going. We'll just take 5 minutes for a short context setting talk between the moderators. So, the power scenario, all of us are aware of it. Everyone among you is from the power industry. The power scenario in India has been visibly improving the past few years. The government, I think, is well on its way to the target of 100% electrification of households, even though the 24/7 power for all is probably some distance away. Per capita consumption of power is also rising, although our average of slightly more than 1,100 kWh is less than half the global average. And I'm not talking of advanced economies, just the global average of 2670. But that's okay, we are improving. The target of 175 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity is a great one. We are inching towards it. There are challenges, no doubt. It's a very challenging sector to be working in. But the good thing is that we seem to be moving in the right direction. Unfortunately, just like other industries, COVID-19 has disturbed the momentum in the power industry as well. And the lockdown induced, reduction in the industrial activity has hit the power sector very hard.
At least the three key indicators of the health of India's power sector, which is demand, supply or generation, and capacity utilization of power plants, are painting a worrisome picture, fueled by the broader ongoing economic slowdown that we see around us, a prolonged monsoon season, and the continued deterioration of the health of DISCOMs is only adding to the woes. Estimates show that the months of lockdown, which began from the 24th of March, saw electricity demand shrink by 25 to 30%. Though IFC has predicted that there will be a pickup in demand, but it will perhaps largely depend on the overall recovery of the economic activity. Fear looms about the vicious cycle of demand compression leading to revenue loss for DISCOMs and ultimately a liquidity crunch in the sector.
Yeah, DISCOMs are the glamorous part of the business, right? So government also intervention has been largely focused on DISCOMs. The MNRE, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, has taken a far more pro-generator stance, thankfully, on that. They've insisted on protecting the must-run status of renewable projects and rejected any claims by DISCOMs of force majeure. But, the Indian power sector is no stranger to crisis. These things keep happening, from payment delays by DISCOMs to bankruptcy of large generation capacities, regulatory inconsistencies. But then you could say these are challenges that are there in other industries too. But the power sector has weathered many a storm.
At the same time, long-term changes are also playing out with the renewable energy picking up pace. Today, RE, or renewable energy, including hydro, comprises 35% of India's installed capacity. And world over, what we see, there's a significant change that is coming about. That is, utilities are transitioning themselves from a delivery-focused role to one that orchestrates data and services. And so by 2025, it's expected that a large number of industry players will derive revenue from services and energy data. There's hope that the proposed amendments to the Electricity Act and the acceleration of technology adoption in the entire energy chain will make a difference to the power ecosystem. To understand the macro trends in the power sector and the technology penetration into it, we will spend the next 5 minutes listening into insights from Vineet of EY. Vineet, over to you.
Thank you, Chetna. Thank you, Alokesh. So first of all, thanks everyone to attend this session. So as rightly conveyed by, set the context by Alokesh and Suchetna. So I would just like to communicate my view in terms of how this sector is transforming. So power sector, out of the industry, what we have seen, the infrastructure sector, power is one of the important sectors. And out of power, generation is playing a very important role. And rather, I would say generation is most disruptive sector in last 5 years. So though we largely tied up with the distribution sector, where most of the challenges we see, because those are linked with the customer, but power sector challenges are behind the curtain, both the challenges which typically are not in the public domain too much with the retail customer itself. So how this journey is transforming. So I'll take a minute in terms of the sector, how sector is transforming. So sector right now are almost on 375 gigawatt installed capacity, wherein the major disruption happened way back around 10 to 12 years back, IPP participation. So now IPP is contributing almost 48% of this installed capacity, wherein central PSUs are contributing 24%, state PSUs are 28%. So the first disruption, what we have seen, IPP participation. So now IPP are taking forward this journey significantly, number one. Secondly, if we go back almost 10 years back, what we have seen, India's total generation was 0.8 trillion unit. Now we are sitting on 1.4 trillion. Last year, the best number was last year, 1.4 trillion, which almost 80% jump within 10 years. So that clearly shows how our sector, this generation sector, is transforming. So with this background, the one parameter which I leave it up to the technical part. So technical experts are here. I leave it up to them. They can explain very much in detail. That's the PLF part, which significantly brought down in last 10 years. It was within the range of almost 65 to 70%. Now it is on 56%. And last but not least, sector in 2010 was almost peak deficit was 13%. Now it's deficit almost negligible. It's a 0.7% deficit we are sitting on. So this is what sector is, how sector is transforming. In my view, there are three important intervention, or I would say disruptions, happening in this sector, which change the dynamics of this sector. First was Paris Climate Agreement, which clearly talks about 3 points. First thing, that India would be on 40% non-fossil fuel by 2030. Second was India would be on 33 to 35% green gas emission reduction, baseline 2005. And third was India will create a carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons, which means that India need to be almost double number of trees which were in 2015 itself. So this was the first major disruption happening in the sector. Second disruption which we are forcing, not only India, globally, all generation utilities are witness for this, that grid parity with distributed solar with storage. So this parity is coming very soon in the market. We have seen recently a tender where peak demand will be met through battery storage. So this parity, based on market research, it's coming that most likely globally it will be achieved by 2022-23. India may be 1 or 2 years later, but we are very close to that. This is a second major disruption. Third, which Suchetna rightly conveyed, that not only is specific to generation, but every sector is embracing that change or transformation. That's a technology enablement. So all utility GenCos are now adopting technology, be it start from fundamental, from ERP to enterprise asset management to program management based on drone monitoring, analytics. So all these kind of a technological intervention. So these three major disruptions are changing the dynamics of the generation sector. So taking cue from the first part, which I communicated about Paris Climate Agreement. So now India is sitting almost on 36%, India's total generation capacity, 36% is coming from renewable energy, while global number is 26%. So we can say average, from average point of view, India is far ahead. And whatever the targets India have committed by 2022, it's 175 gigawatt. By 2027, it's 275 gigawatt. By 2030, it's 450 gigawatt. These are very, very aggressive target. And by 2030, India is envisaging 54% generation capacity. India generation capacity will come from renewable sources, while India's commitment is 40% in Paris Climate Agreement. So we can see this kind of aggressiveness is coming in the market, and it is changing the dynamics with incumbent thermal power sector itself. So that kind of change is happening in the sector. On top of that, if we talk about the renewable sector, India is very aggressive in terms of very active member of ISA. India is proposing next month, I hope that it would be clear, next month India is proposing for World Solar Bank of 1 trillion capital infusion in ISA, so this World Solar Bank. So these kind of initiatives are changing the sector and India's image across the global platform. Moreover, if we all know that OSOWG is coming in the picture. So this all is changing the dynamics of the sector. Now coming to the other part, this all are planned initiatives. So one thing which Suchetna and Alokesh highlighted happened in recent past that was not planned, but that was force majeure, that every country across the globe needs to embrace this pandemic, this COVID pandemic. So this really dent the progress of the sector, and specifically generation sector. So if I see generation, because they are dependent upon distribution sector. So generation, if I see the number which were published February 20, we were pretty well on the pace in terms of growth. We were sitting on 11.7%, if I'm not wrong, 11.7% growth as compared to February 2019 in terms of demand. But because of this pandemic, the range of demand dropped 22 to 24% in next 5 months. So it started from March, almost 8%, and peak was in May, almost 15%. But the good thing, the numbers published day before yesterday by Ministry that India is now on backtrack is 0.9% growth of power generation. And the first after this first 15 days of September itself, and the peak increased 0.7%. So it clearly shows that India is on track. And the global references which we came through, what they suggest that every country face the same scenario, where India is one of the fastest recovering countries across the globe, because India started this lockdown from May 4th, and from May 4th to September, it's a commendable journey. So this is what is happening in terms of India, but globally, two global message came in the picture that every country face these challenges and recovering very fast. European Union is also on the same number which were 2019 numbers, so they have also recovered. Their drop was almost 12%. The one country, China, they got a growth in the month of June. They were 6% because they came from this pandemic effect well ahead than India and other countries. So this happened, number one scenario, recovering from their challenges. Second was infusion of renewable energy. So there was a pattern which was observed throughout this pandemic period, that thermal interventions came in a lower manner as compared to renewable interventions. So renewable infusion was more, and that was an obvious reason because of low operating costs of renewable energy, and some certain countries were having regulations in place. So those were the clear messages came from COVID. Now the last part which I told about the technological interventions. Sorry, I just missed one point, that very pertinent point is Alokesh highlighted in terms of financial part of DISCOMs. So that's the one challenge which GENCOs are facing, because our distribution companies which were sitting on almost 1.9 trillion outstandings of GENCOs now sitting on 1.3. Latest number suggests 1.3 trillion. And our central government is pushing this, and they are supporting a lot. They came up with the packages of 90,000 K earlier, which further increased 1.2 trillion just to make this sector viable, so that investors should be very much with this sector, but there are certain incidences which happened in past during the COVID, that certain discoms raised the point that they even don't want to pay the fixed charges, which are again the negative sentiment in the sector itself. So I would say that these kind of sentiments are hitting the investors. These kind of incidents are hitting the sentiments of investors. Now coming to the last part from my side, which I told about technological intervention. So all these scenarios, now we are hearing digital is a new normal. So all utilities, be it generation, transmission, distribution, all are adopting digital. So we all are having this webinar. Otherwise, we must have met at some place physically and we could have a discussion. So that's, you can understand, that's the power of digital. So it's modern workplace is coming in picture. Utilities are going to implement basic building block of ERP implementation very aggressively. At least Indian power distribution and generation and transmission are adopting ERP. On top of that, leading power generation companies are trying to utilize or take a leverage of the data which they are having. So based on analytical capability they want to develop, they want to utilize that data for predictive maintenance of their assets. It will increase, it will reduce the maintenance cost, increase the life, and last but not least, in terms of health and safety of their employees. So they are now using technology, drone technology, smart helmet, or smart workforce kind of a digital interventions to make this solution, this sector more viable, more safe, more secure. Over to you, Alokesh. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vineet. In fact, you made quite a few very, very pertinent points. In fact, the fact that we are already 35, 36%, 35 point something, so you can round it off to either 35 or 36. That renewable is that much of our installed capacity is a very good thing. I think 2030 should be a walk in the park for the 40% target. At the same time, also on technology aspect, it's not just about ERPs, but somebody had once told me that, and this is not like a couple of days ago, but a couple of years ago, that there is a windmill in Denmark, which apparently an entire windmill farm, which is managed by just one person. So it's also about automation technologies, right? While we are improving your processes through ERP and other solutions, but it's also about using automation technologies to improve generation and to improve, the evacuation through transmission. So let me now come to the discussion. Thank you, Vineet, for that context. It was really very, very useful. I will first come to Mr. Parameswaran of NHPC. So, Mr. Parameswaran, our first talking point is on the impact of COVID on the power generators and what kind of impact it has had on you on various aspects, financial as well as otherwise. There's an estimate from CII that says that the lockdown till May, it might have resulted in total demand compression of 33 to 36 billion units of electricity, which implies a net revenue loss of 25,000 to 30,000 crores at the DISCOM level. Now, that is, of course, something to worry about, but we would like to know from you, both from a liquidity perspective and other operational and other perspectives, what are the problems that you faced in COVID and how have you overcome them? Mr. Parameswaran.
Yeah. Actually, we are a hydro company, and as such, because of the loss in demand that consequence of the COVID, we, being a hydro sector, were must-run plants. And as such, disruption to the extent that in case of breakdown, yes. But otherwise, the generation was dependent on the water, and we have been able to generate to the extent that we had water in the reservoir. As far as, the liquidity is concerned, yes, receivables were hit and the collection was poor as compared to the same period last year. The collections have dropped down to around 55% against 75 to 80%, which was in the corresponding period last year.
So this you're talking of April, May, sir?
Huh?
Are you talking about April, May, June, Q1?
Yeah, including Q2. Including Q2 I'm talking about. See, generation-wise, as compared to last year, we have not done very badly as such. Generation-wise, because, us being a must-run plant, disruptions due to, breakdown of units in Chamera 2. Two of our units were out, and the scheduled commissioning was July, but because the supplies could not be affected because of the COVID, the delay has occurred, and we'll be able to only commission the plant maybe in October. So the delay about the breakdown, which because the supplies were not coming and even the manpower was an issue. As far as running the plants, I mean, Vineet had said, we are using technology. Yes, technology for running the plant. Yes, for asset management. Yes, but for breakdowns, the spares are required. The spares, when we have to requisition spares, the manufacturers are not able to send the spares across to your plant. So for those type of disruptions we have faced, but apart from that, hydro sector in general and NHPC in particular have been able to deliver reasonably well, I would say, except of course for the breakdown that one of the plants, one more plant, Kishanganj also. Yeah.
Okay, I'll take this question to Mr. Ponuraj and Mr. Ramesh. I'll come to Mr. Ponuraj first. Sir, Alokita just pointed out to how the compression of demand has led to, is likely to lead to a huge financial loss, revenue loss for the DISCOMs. What is the impact of that on state utilities such as KPCL?
Thanks, Lochna. I would like to just start with the data which I have for April to August month, over 3 years period, 2018, 2019 and 2020, or on the current year, right? So if I take this in the year 18-19, the demand and consumption was about 28,241 million units in Karnataka for the COVID period, this April to August. And the same thing was in the year 2019-20, it is about 30,000 million units. And in the current year, it is 27,000. Actually, as per the normal growth in the demand, annual growth in the demand, it should have been 33,000 million units. Whereas it has come down to 27,000 million units, which means about 6,000 million units is reduction in this current year. So 6,000 million units over 27,000, it's almost about 30% reduction we have seen in
reduction is in thermal? Is in thermal or is it?
Sir, it is overall state demand I'm talking about. I'm not talking about thermal alone. I'll come to thermal. The thermal in Karnataka, it is quite, depressing. So I don't know whether I should paint that depressive picture.
Okay.
For example,
but we wanted to know specifically about your state. What has been the extent of the compression of demand, and what is the impact on your business specifically?
And what is the solution also,
Yeah.
Apart from the problem that you will tell us, also tell us, what's the way forward.
Correct, yeah. So the contraction in demand for this 4 months is about 6,000 million units, which is roughly about 30% of the demand. Now, if we look at in Karnataka, we have RE penetration to the extent of about 50 to 60% in generation and consumption. In terms of installed capacity, if you look at RE, solar and wind together is about 120% of the total conventional energy sources, both hydel and thermal put together. So RE is about 14,000 and the conventional thermal and hydel together is about 11,000 megawatt. So if we look at even in consumption also, the generation and consumption also, at some point of time this year, it was about 90% in the daytime coming from RE alone, 90%. But whereas if we take whole day, it will come to around 45 to 50%. Now, if we take over a period of 1 year, the last 1 year, if I take it, it's coming to around 45%. So the Karnataka has been leading the solar revolution from the front, and the solar penetration is very high. Because of that, during the COVID period, never in the history we had all our thermal units. We have about 14 thermal units. All thermal units were shut down. Now, 14 units all were shut down for almost about 2.5 months. 2.5 months means roughly about 1,500 crores is the impact for Karnataka Power Corporation Limited alone. So that's a revenue which we have lost. And now in that, the only benefit we are going to get, or only helping hand we are going to get, is that some kind of deferred payment for repayments, and as well as some subsidy which government has promised, and which may come in due course of time. When I come to Mr. Alokesh's question on what is that that can be done to come out of this, I'm sure this 4 months, 5 months period is not going to put us into big trouble. We will be able to come back because our turnover is about 12,000 crores in a year, of which about 1,500 crores if I lose, and I will be able to recover over a period of next 1 or 2 years. So I would be forced to go for taking loan and then try to bridge the gap between income and expenditure. However, the future for thermal power plants in Karnataka is quite grim because the installed capacity in RE itself is about 14,000 megawatt, and what is the maximum peak demand in the state is about 12,000 megawatt. So we are in Karnataka leading the RE revolution, at the same time facing all the questions of what will happen to the thermal power plant. So that is something which needs to be worked out. There are certain steps which we have taken up to reduce the cost of coal and things like that. Probably I will get into those details when further discussion develops. So I will leave at that so that other speakers would be able to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ponuraj. I'll take the question to Mr. Ramesh. Mr. Ponuraj was talking about the situation of thermal vis-a-vis renewable. Rajasthan has been the traditional leader when it comes to renewable, especially with the solar installed capacity that you have. So are you also, do you share in Mr. Ponuraj's grim view about the thermal installed capacity? And also, what has been the situation of demand as far as Rajasthan is concerned?
Yeah, Cheta, my point would be to give a background of the Rajasthan state. I would like to say that though I not be reflecting much on renewable and the overall energy sector of Rajasthan, I restrict myself particularly to the generation sector. So the installed capacity of Rajasthan happens to be about 21,000, which includes CGS, private purchases, and our own purchases and whatever short-term purchases that they do, of which our contribution is about 6,800 megawatts. Of which we have about 600 megawatts of gas, from which about 300 is literally not able. We are not able to access gas because of the because of the price issues, and 300 out of that 300 we only operate about 100 or so because of the shortage of gas. So that effectively brings us back to about 6,000 megawatts, which includes about 200 megawatts of hydel. So effectively, we are talking something like 5,700 megawatts of thermal capacity, which is available for us. So what we could see with reference to the COVID situation was, like on a normally CAGR basis, we used to see every year a growth of about 8 to 10%. But this time the growth rate was not there. And minus that, we also had a shortage of about the offtake shortage of about 25 to 30%, particularly in the months of April, because of the lockdown, wherein most of the industries got closed, and the impact was concurrently felt on the whole grid, including us. And with reference to renewables, yes, I would like to say Rajasthan has been a leader, but as we all know, that that doesn't give firm power. So effectively, we are all at the mercy of again ramping up and ramping down our power plants as per the need of the grid, which makes us lose a lot of efficiency and which is not compensated, as I understand, like in many states where the state grid code doesn't compensate the losses because of the ramping up and down and frequent back down of our thermal generators. So that has been a problem with us because yes, right. The solar did come to some rescue, but equally the overall demand was also less. So effectively, we had to bear the burden of the operational flexibilities of other renewable sources. So I would put it this way rather than saying it is a complete asset, renewable being a complete asset. And with reference to the financial situation, I would certainly say, like most of the, I don't know, I'm not very sure about the financial figures of most of the generation companies, but unfortunately, the distribution companies as of now owe about 25,500 crore rupees to the power generation company.
Right.
And this was about 21,000 at the start of the COVID period. Now it has catapulted to another 3,500 to 4,000 being added to that this thing. So financially also, as we all know, in the initial months, that is April and May, the distribution companies faced shortage of cash flows from the revenues that were to come from the customers, and secondly the difficult situation of most of the governments in not able to meet the commitments of the subsidy payments to the distribution companies, which in turn effectively fell on the state power generation companies where their cash flows got affected. Fortunately, because the demand was also less, we were able to bear this. But now the demand is coming up, so effectively all other commitments are also getting activated. So at this point of time, my main flagging issue would be whatever working capital loans that our institution was forced to take because of the dues that were to be accrued from the distribution companies are staring into our face. So the Indian financial system, particularly the banking system and the two major lenders, that is PFC and REC, may have to be very pragmatic to the situation that the defaults have to be avoided by giving a lending hand, wherein I would very strongly stress on this platform for giving a debt restructuring program for the generation companies particularly, which includes elongation of the debt repayment, which includes reduction in the very high 12 to 13% of interest that we had taken loans, and the third thing being moratorium. Moratorium, I think it has helped us a lot, but 6 months is, I think, not just enough to come out of this very complex problem. So this moratorium should extend to a longer period, wherein overall situation of the finance, I mean, because we cannot see power sector in isolation of the financial sector and the state country's economy. So effectively we have to, but at the same time we cannot go on just branding companies as defaulting companies and then going in for NPAs. So the more practical situation would be trying to understand this problem and also trying to extend the period of moratorium with special emphasis on debt restructuring of generation companies being looked at. Whereas the much relief was given to distribution companies in terms of extra loans that were given by REC and PFC, but no such luxury was provided to the state power generation companies, wherein most of the payments of this particular loans picked up by distribution companies went to the PGCIL, NTPC, and other central generators, leaving the state generation companies to deal with their own problems, which was, of course, created by the distribution companies.
Right. Very interesting comments indeed, Mr. Ramesh. I'll come to Mr. Singh on the same, question on the moratorium issue and other things. In fact, Mr. Singh, you are joining us, from the Northeast, which is my favorite place in this country. I have spent the first 20 years of my life in various parts of the Northeast. Are you joining from Shillong or Guwahati?
Yeah, actually, right now, this meeting I have joined from my Delhi office. I'm stuck up here.
You're stuck in Delhi.
Generally, operate from Shillong and Guwahati. My major team part is there in Shillong and Guwahati, and different power plants in North.
I was born in Guwahati and I did my part of my education in Shillong. So, you and I can chat later on what you all are doing over there. Northeastern Power is very, very interesting. Being a mostly hydro company, you are more renewable than, traditional. You have got a little bit of thermal, but mostly it's hydro, if I understand correctly. So, just taking forward the comments that, was said by Mr. Ramesh, the moratorium to discounts and the financial crunch, how has this had an impact on companies like yours? Has it helped you? Has it harmed you? And apart from that, what are the other issues? Are you facing a liquidity issue? What is the power situation in the Northeast that you are dealing with currently?
Yes, very well. I think this question is very pertinent. You see, we are Northeastern Electric Power Corporation. We are supplying around 40, as of now, around 45% of the installed capacity of whole of the Northeast installed capacity. In terms of installed capacity. In terms of energy, around 40% of energy we are supplying. So it is the single biggest generator in the Northeast. We have been badly impacted by this COVID situation. You see, we have today our outstandings are more than 1,000 crore in a turnover of around 2,500 crores. So our receivables are standing more than 130 days of billing. That's not a very healthy situation. And many DISCOMs have defaulted. They have sought a lot of relief from the government. And in fixed charges alone, we were asked by the Ministry of Power, as per their directions, to pass off around 46 crores offhand, just a discount on that. And on the late payment surcharge also, on the late payment surcharge also, we've been asked to reduce the interest rate. So that will be having an impact of another maybe 100 plus crores, or maybe more than 150 crores on us. And we have high cost employees, and they are governed by central pay structures. The staffing pattern, of course, is as to the government norms, not like a private generating company, and not like IPPs. We don't have that luxury. We have to comply to a lot of course, they also have to comply to labor laws, but the government working is entirely different.
Of course.
And we are having a lot of staff, and to cater to establishment and salary costs alone is a real problem. But for those things, if you see the operational parameters of our plants, like today we are operating 6 hydro plants and 3 combined cycle gas-based power plants. All are operating at above the national average level. The reason was that there were no demand suppression in NIPCO as such, but there have been huge dues accumulation during this COVID impact. Why there were no demand suppression was our hydro plants are old and the tariff is very low. One plant we are supplying at 1 rupee 6 paise. Other plant, Mega 405 megawatt, this Ranganadi plant, the tariff is around 2 rupees. Kopili power plant is around 1 rupee 20 paise. And our total basket tariff, you take gas, thermal altogether, gas-based and hydro altogether, it comes less than 250. So those distribution companies we were a preferred, Genco supplying to them. We are tied up through PPA already. So, so their requirement was being met very decently, but the payments were not coming. That was impact on us. Unfortunately, one incident of October 2019, we lost one power plant in major flood due to rupture of a penstock which carried water from the headrest tunnel to the power plant. Mm-hmm. So 200 megawatt was out of production. It will be out of production for another 1 year or so, around 1 year to 15 months. So that also, that 200 megawatt was already set from the generating side. But we have added another 300 megawatt from a mega coming plant. Another 300 megawatt we are adding by maybe October end or so. Mm-hmm. This new addition, of course, there were some challenges because we didn't have tied up power purchase agreements. We are selling in the exchange, and we are exporting some power to Nepal through NTPC Vidyut Vyapar Nigam Limited. Okay. We are not getting a very good rate, of course, and even our cost of generation not getting recovered. So those kind of challenges are coming. The tariff of the first year tariff of that plant is in the range of 450, which is very realistic. Mm-hmm. And any plant, if you take a most attractive hydro plant, which has been now categorized in renewables energy space, you can't generate a power. That's why I'm basically a designing and implementation professional. I was with NHPC earlier for 31 years, where I was involved in design of around more than 10 power plants of NHPC. And I operated 6 power plants in different capacities, from maintenance manager to head of the plant. So I can tell you set up.
So you must be knowing Mr. Parameswaran from before.
Yeah. I believe we and we are colleagues. We are almost same batch. We are same batch. And then I moved to NIPCO as director in 2016. And since there I'm there, and I took over as CMD last September. I can say that hydros, now that categorization alone is not going to solve the problem, because hydro tariff, if you take most attractive power plant in hydro, that is the perspective I'd like to share at this platform. What defines the most attractive power plant in hydro in that renewable space is the minimum construction cost you take. You take zero time and cost overrun. You take the easiest logistics. These are the favorable factors. And you take the highest yield from the power plant. That is called PLF.
Yeah.
So the PLF, plant load factor of hydro power plant, Central Electricity Authority clears on cost economics, it varies from 40 to 60%. The lowest cutoff is 40%, and the highest you can achieve as high as 70% in the power plants where hydrology is very supportive. So the power plant, let us take for our assumption, a power plant having a plant load factor of 60% plus, which is, it falls in very exceptional and rare category. Then we build a power plant at the narrowest gorge where you have the dam length will be minimum and the dam height will be minimum. The most cost intensive component in a hydropower plant is dam, headrest tunnel, which carries water from the reservoir to the turbines, and the civil structures. Typically, they constitute 75 to 80% of the cost. Electromechanical equipment and hydromechanical gates, they constitute 20 to 25%. So the bulk of the cost goes in that civil structures, the dam, headrest tunnel, and powerhouse building, and the tailrest tunnel. These are for this very simple, the components are not many. So if you take, I will just utilize this opportunity to explain this perspective, which is really very uncommonly shared. It's not shared very commonly. So most attractive power plant example could be Teesta 3 power plant, which is with Teesta Urja. This is 1,200 megawatt. Over there, you have a smallest dam. So on the dam construction, you are spending minimum money, minimum cost. And the headrest tunnel has the highest gradient. In a 9-kilometer tunnel, you get a 900-meter drop. So it is 1-to-1 slope. So head is the real there, the energy. And the power plant, the powerhouse construction also is not a very difficult location there. To top it all, the hydrology is very supportive. You have a load factor of around, plant load factor of around 60%. So you have all the favorable factors: minimum cost of construction, highest energy yield, and couple it with zero time and cost overrun. You don't have any time overrun, you don't have any cost overrun. So you don't incur extra interest during construction burden, any extra interest burden or anything. Even then, if you assume those things, highest yield, minimum construction cost, and zero time and cost overrun, we have fairly estimated no power plant can give you a tariff of less than 4 rupees to 450. That's the best case scenario. Otherwise, we average.
You have power plants which are at almost 1/4 of that tariff, right? You said 1 rupee something.
But because of their age, that they have all depreciated, they're running for 30 years, 25, 30 years like that.
Right. Okay.
So the irony is, now I have commissioned 300 megawatt and 300 megawatt I'm going to add next month. Now I am selling that power in a day ahead market and real time market. Sometimes the rates are going as low as 60 paise.
Absolutely.
60 paise. Sometimes I'm selling at 1 rupee, sometimes it's 2 rupees. So my feeling from generator side is these are of course maybe temporarily due to one reason of demand suppression, but it's not always the demand suppression alone, because being a government company was mandated to implement Deen Dayal Upadhyaya Gram Vidyutkaran Yojana, which is extension of Rajiv Ji Bhai.
Yeah.
Last while, and we did around 22,000 households in 2 districts of Tripura. What typically I noticed, I don't know whether the same scenario is there in other states. I won't be able to comment because that kind of work I have done first time, rural rectification. We were interested in that job. You see the connected load over there is hardly 400 to 500 watts. And aspirations of people are going very high. Over there, the definition of rural electrification, the definition alone will not reflect the correct picture. So there were 2 parts of that rural infrastructure. One is building the 11 kilovolt, 450 volt line substations. That was the infrastructure part. Second was your household electrification. inside, then you are having a BPL beaters connection and, one lamp and a fan and maybe a couple of, and maybe battery, this mobile charging socket and all. So aspirations of people are going. And the real load of those new connections, and we have connected, I think, if I'm not wrong, more than 18,000 villages in last few years. So that is, the whole load is not reflecting. And I think at the cost of offending my DISCOM friends here, we feel, because there will be always a conflict of interest in DISCOMs, transmission companies and GENCOs.
Absolutely.
The perspective I've been sharing, I was called to Parliament as part of the this thing, as part of being CEO of a CPSU, and we have to give account to the Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
So two things are affecting GENCOs also, and it's all interconnected. We have a feeling that there is rationing of power, because new plants, there will be the real discovery of cost will be in 450 like that. And majorly out of my 2057 megawatt in NIPCO, 1,525 comes from hydro and 527 comes from combined cycle gas based. We don't have any coal plant. We are reasonably clean energy source.
Mm-hmm.
And gas plant also, we are not having a high tariff. Typically, my average tariff is in the range of 350 or so, which is not very high for a gas plant.
Right.
Despite poor supply of gas, we are getting around 70% only, maybe 60% of the contracted gas quantity because of shortage of gas in that area. Because gas allocation system has been changed, the policy has been changed.
Mm-hmm.
We are falling in power generation from the gas-based power plant is falling in priority 4. First one is going to T states. Second is, I think, city gas distribution. And third is fertilizer, gas to the fertilizer plant. And fourth is power generation. So if anything, any quantity is left out from those 3 priority sectors, then it comes to us. So my plant, as some of my friends has rightly said, it is impacted by PLF very badly. And there are a lot of generation backdowns. I'm not able to utilize my full capacity. Despite those things, and my, my auxiliaries have to run, and backdown time is 8 to 10 hours. Then also, I'm giving an average rate of around 350, 527 megawatt in Northeast. So had it been good, let us, if I put my plant load factor due to good gas supply, it can be brought down further. Now, question is how our recovery of cost, how our offtake improves, how we survive as generating companies. On the other side, being a government company, we are laden with a lot of staff, which are high cost staff. One PN also, cost to the company of a senior PN in government companies around 2 lakh rupees a month, believe me. So, and so that is, of course, one good thing has happened is there have been huge competition from IPPs. They have forced the CPSU to cut the staff and redundant cost.
Mm-hmm.
We are shedding unproductive staff, that those exercises have started. We are improving our inventory management. We're installing ERP, doing a lot of things, predictive maintenance, condition monitoring system. So many things are being done. The biggest chunk is on staff cost, establishment costs in the government compliances and so many laws.
In fact, we'll come to the technology part and the
how technology, I'll say, by very nature of the combined cycle gas-based plant, they had these plants have huge amount of automation already because they can't work like that. You can't have a manual, highly manual dependent system in gas-based power plants. So they are largely SCADA based, the supervisory control and data acquisition system, which is state-of-the-art technology. And they're all imported technology from Mitsubishi, GE and all. In 3 of our hydro plants, new plants, we have SCADA, which is, one is a German company and 2 are BHEL, that is Max DNA SCADA. So, and that plant can be remotely operated sitting from Delhi. If I just send my command to an IP address, I can run my plant. Full automation level can be achieved. So 3 plants we have done complete, we are on the latest technology platform. The 3 older plants are running on older technology, but we are renovating those plants. They have outlived their life, and then we'll have technology. So
thank you for bringing the topic of technology, and thank you for being so candid. It's very rarely that you meet somebody from PSU who talks about the social obligations that they have vis-a-vis the problems that perhaps lead to the profitability of their business.
Yes, yes.
But you raised a very important point about the plant load factor. And before I come back to you, Mr. Singh, I'd like to take that question to Rajiv of SAP. Rajiv, Mr. Singh just spoke about the average PLF in the country, and it is falling below the all-time low level, perhaps. And then you have aging generation infrastructure, which is affecting the overall performance of the plant, which also Mr. Singh spoke about. Now, what is the role of technology in addressing these critical business challenges in the sector?
Before, I'll take one more minute from you.
Sure.
One point particularly I want to make, I just in the thick of discussion, I missed that point. So I was talking about, holistic discussion, encompassing generation, transmission and distribution all taken together. So we have, from generating side, we had a feeling that, on every unit sold, distribution companies are losing heavily. So there have been artificial rationing, there have been artificial load sheddings. Of course, I don't intend to offend, but that may be one of the reasons. Secondly, where we are getting the hit from another, there is an intermediate link that is called CTUs or maybe state transmission utilities. So while selling this common power, I mean, my point of injection is Arunachal Pradesh, this remotest corner of India. I'm injecting at my bus bar at 3 rupees 15 paise. I think, sorry, 250. Thus, I'm bearing all the cost, I'm taking the hit. Now the landed cost of that power at Delhi periphery or Haryana periphery, you add another maybe 1.2 rupees or some odd rupees like that. So to a guy sitting in Haryana, that power will cost him 250 plus 120. That rationale really I could not understand. I have debated in parliament also. If generating costs you around 3 rupees, how much transmission is going to cost 130? I was part of that UT conference in 2011, when for every unit there was an umbrella price for transmission that was 11 paise average. It was averaging out. You send the power from any corner to any corner of India. Of course, the national grid was not there. We had regional grids. So you send the power from one remote corner of a grid to another corner. Maybe northern grid was the largest. And then it was costing 11 paise. In one single stroke, it reached 56 paise in UT conference because it was made dependent on direction, distance, and quantum. It was very strange logic. Then now today stands as high as 130 rupees, 1 rupees 30 paise from I think end to end, from remotest corner to remotest corner. And when particularly there is one nation, one grid and one frequency. So that is also eating into our, that is making us more uncompetitive. And this frequent, now this, as you asked me about Corona times, like Tripura had a lot of load shedding. And I was testing doing the commissioning of my 150 megawatt 2 units. I could not do the commissioning test for 10 days because they were unable to load the unit full to its full megawatt capacity. And unless you demonstrate the full capacity, you are not declared on commercial operation and you are not able to do the full load protocol test. So that kind of challenges are happening.
Of course.
That is, so I think we had to do the reform starting from the downstream to the upstream, unlike other sectors. So we have to first fix the problems in the distribution sector. Then in transmission, one more point, very important, which I have noted. There are a lot of national redundant assets in transmission. You take Biswanath Chariali in Assam to Agra line. That line is now loaded hardly to 10 to 15% capacity. Asset cost of few thousand crore. That is distributed universally, equally among all the generators, declaring a national asset. There are many such national assets which are idling, and that cost is being made to bear by the generating companies. And once the power purchaser is sitting by Goa was one of my power purchaser from Arunachal Power. And if he adds 150 to his transport cost of power, it makes it really unviable for him. So these whole things have to be seen in totality. That is my simple submission. Other things specific to my sector, I'm a hydro expert. I'm very much open to discuss on electricity policy and other things. I'll request my other panelists to come in. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. We'll come back to you with the technology question. We would want to hear from you in further details. But Rajiv, when you interact, I go back to the question that I asked you some time back. When you interact with your with companies in the power generation business. How do you think the role of technology is coming to the fore when you're addressing these critical business challenges, especially in a world that is hit by COVID?
Yeah, thank you, Chetna. And it's absolutely enlightening to hear some of such senior panelists and hear some of the challenges. And
louder. Yeah.
Am I clear now? Is it
Yeah,
audible?
it's better now. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just said that it's absolutely fascinating to hear such eminent panelists here and talk about a segment which is very close to SAP's heart. So utilities is absolutely fundamental to our strength. In India, we are almost with all the power generation organizations, and we're happy to have tremendous discussions around these topics. And to your point, Sujatna, about plant load factor,
yeah,
just coming down, absolutely right. So market scenarios, and it's a changing market scenario, whether it's renewable, solar impacting that, or it's COVID demand, that's there to stay. And that's something I always, we've discussed internally. There are only two ways to possibly come out of any situation for an enterprise or a corporation. And I go back to very basic, which I always think is, how do you fight back on your revenue? And second, if that is something which is market driven, which I feel here, how do you fall back or reduce your costs? These are the only two fundamentals basis which we believe any IT intervention can help any two organizations. Now, if you look at in this particular scenario, it is clear to me that the market, how it has taken shape, whether it's COVID or some of the pressure coming from solar plants, etc. The focus has to be on reducing cost. Now, cost, you can absolutely work on reducing known costs, which are known for us, and I call them as known costs because they can be project-related delays. They can be supply chain, as I heard one of the panelists say, that supply chain-related delays, some of the spare parts not reaching that. They can be finance-related delays. Now, which I call as transactional system, which you have a transactional system which can possibly take care of some of these known costs. If you have a good transactional system and ERP, it can absolutely take care of some of these fundamental issues where you can monitor your project related delays, supply chain, you can possibly monitor who are the multiple suppliers, etc. What is very important today, and that's where most of these generational companies have moved forward to have a transactional system which is taking care of these basic aspects. What is very important is to know what are the unforeseen costs. And unforeseen cost, when I say, it is the breakdown cost of your plant, the asset that you have, which is something which, if you're not really monitoring it well, right now you're doing service and management, but there are still breakdown costs. Can you monitor that? Can you reduce your unknown, unforeseen costs? Second, is your supplier risk. Today, our contracts are long-term contracts. They are 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, long-term contracts. Is a supplier who's your international supplier is at risk in some other country, with there is a possibility that that particular supplier may not be able to honor his commitments in India, in a particular geography? How are you monitoring that? Third, of course, on the employee side, I heard my previous panelists talk about employee-related costs which are there. How are we identifying some of these underlying unforeseen costs is where the modern technology, which we call as intelligent systems, can really help, which whether it's condition-based monitoring or it's predictive asset maintenance or an employee engagement based on conversational AI, whether you're really having a conversation or engagement with your employee based on their immediate needs, or even pensioners. Can they really just interact with the system and get all their queries answered immediately? And this is what I call as unforeseen costs. Why I said unforeseen costs on employees, maybe union-based related costs. People in certain unforeseen situations, how can you avoid some of these unforeseen costs if they are employee engagement? And thirdly, again, on the supplier risk management side, today there are tools available which can actually predict that this particular supplier for you or a vendor is going to be a potential risk. and hence some of these unforeseen costs which can be addressed by systems which are intelligent using technologies of artificial intelligence or machine learning which are predictive in nature. Lastly, I believe that there is a possibility going forward that an asset level profitability needs to be managed. And when I say asset level profitability, we are doing this conversation with some of our transport organizations, whether they are metros, whether a station can be a profitable asset or a machine can be a profitable asset. Can you allocate costs to a machine where you can measure whether the profitability of that asset is increasing by your technology interventions or they're reducing? And that's when the minute we are able to achieve that profitability at an asset level, we can really contribute to these cost pressures that some of these organizations are facing. So Chetna, back to you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Rajiv. Some very interesting points, and I want to come to Mr. Ramesh and Nuraj on the plant load factor point that Rajiv also raised, and there's been some reference to it towards the beginning also. How big really is the financial cost for you, running plants at low PLF, giving the falling demand, and also the low purchase power or discounts? How much of a concern is it to you, Mr. Ramesh? You're on mute, sir.
Yeah. Firstly, earlier as I referred, as we all understand how we run our car, if we run at some optimum speed, it will give its best efficiency. In a similar way, this is probably for other people who are also watching. So typically a power plant has also some norms wherein it has to function or run at operations of about 80, 85, 90%. So has to run at its best efficiency. But for the problems that are associated with the LD operations, wherein some are like must-run plants, particularly this renewable solar and wind, in order to accommodate and give bulwark to the system, the thermal power plants are made to fluctuate its operations at basically by ramping up and down. This has a large impact effectively on the running of the machines. It's simple common sense that if you are able to run it at a consistent operational level, then it gives a good efficiency. And if it is made to shut down very frequently and also run at unoptimum levels, then it creates issues of efficiency. So as this discussion had earlier come up, particularly during this COVID period, the PLFs were made to basically get truncated to 30% less than what they used to be in the previous year. So this has obviously created a situation of recoveries for us, wherein our profitability has also been impacted.
Right. I'll come to Mr. Jain with the same question. Sorry.
Suchetna, I had actually gone to Mr. Ponuraj also with this question.
Please.
We'll come to Mr. Jain after.
Sir, we can't hear you.
We cannot hear you, Mr. Ponuraj.
Yeah, Alokesh, now, am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Okay. If I talk about PLF, in fact, PLF is an important factor where the cost varies substantially. About 10 to 20% cost variation will be there if the PLF goes below 60% for thermal power plant. For hydel power plant, it doesn't vary much, but for thermal power plant, yes, it does vary about 15-20%. Now, if you look at the PLF over a period of last 6 years in Karnataka for thermal power plants, it used to be somewhere around 52%, and this year it is 16%. Now, last year it was about 35 to 40%, and this year it has come down to 16%. The impact is not just because of COVID alone, it is a double impact. COVID impact plus monsoon impact, both together has truncated our PLF substantially. That is why for about 2 to 3 months, we had to shut down all our thermal units. 14 units are shut down. So this is going to have two kinds of costs. The cost increase in the variable cost, the cost increase in the fixed cost. For example, if you look at the thermal power industry is a cost plus industry. I'm sure some of you would be aware, some of you may not be aware of this. the tariff is calculated always based on whatever the cost we incur, both operational cost as well as fixed cost like salary and then the debt financing, debt servicing, all that together. Now, the variation in the variable cost is about 10 to 20%. Now, the variation in the fixed cost per unit of power generated depends upon to the extent truncation happens. If the truncation happens to 50%, then the variable cost doubles. Roughly in every thermal power plant, the variable cost per unit of generation will vary from about 1 rupee to 1.7, 1.8 rupees. Now imagine if that becomes double when you truncate the generation, then the whole thing is transferred to the consumers. Ultimately, this truncation, though initially hits the GENCO, finally it is again transferred straight away to the DISCOMs, and DISCOMs transfer that to the consumers. So now in India, when we talk about more and more of RE penetration to take place in various states as well as in the country, what we need to look at is what is the cost of more RE penetration. Is it going to curtail the existing power generation capacity of thermal and hydel units, and then you idle them and then run the RE power, or you are going to catch up with RE power for the increasing demand? If it is increasing demand, the cost is less, but if it is for idling the thermal power plants and doing it, then it is going to be a double cost. So the cost impact is substantial to the extent of about 20-30% in variable cost, which is about roughly, if you take the consumer's impact per unit, you will be paying about 20 paise, 30 paise, 40 paise more per unit. But when it comes to the fixed cost, it could vary from 50 paise to 1 rupee. So that is the impact which it is going to have. So PLF is an important factor. It is always better to utilize the plants at an optimal PLF, which is around 70-80%. Thank you.
Sure. Mr. Ramesh wants to say something. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I just want to add 2 quick points to this, to what Ponnuras said. In fact, it has got a very cascading effect with reference to frequent backing down of the plants. Because by frequent backing down of the plants, our operational variable costs go higher. Once when our variable cost, operational cost goes high, then we are not there in the merit order dispatch, which further reduces our PLFs, ultimately leading to very, very low PLFs, having a cumulative impact on our plant operations. And secondly, one more thing which I would like to add to this platform is, basically inform to this platform is, I think there are provisions in the Central Grid Code to compensate frequent backing down of power plants, particularly thermal, with reference to central generators. But I think my colleagues from the other states are also there. Most of the states do not have this provision of compensation. Even if it's there, it is not to the actual level of the impact. This is what I wanted to highlight here. Thank you.
Mr. Ponnuras, you raised a very valid question about, and it's perhaps a question about policy strategy. You know, we have our environment commitments, which Vineet also mentioned, and keeping that in mind, we are moving towards renewable. But India is also a country which is endowed with large coal reserves. So how do you strike a balance? I'll open this question up for everybody here. How do you strike a balance in a country that has such large coal reserves and where you can't deny the already installed capacity of thermal? So is it time to,
Yeah, Suchetna, if we look at the scenario in India, that the power generation was in deficit for quite some time in the country. Now we are almost reaching this self-sufficiency throughout the country. And if you look at the southern part of the country, all states are almost about 20 to 30% surplus in the generation part. And in Karnataka, we are about 60% surplus. In fact, our installed capacity is 28,000 megawatt, whereas our peak demand was about 12,000 megawatt. Right? If I take 30% PLF for the RE power, then it comes to around 20,000 is the total installed capacity which can continuously generate power. So the self-sufficiency is already there. So we are already having no idling cost. Now, while we have to agree that the future belongs to RE, and over a period of time, the contribution from the thermal power plants will have to come down, no doubt about it. We all have commitments towards environment, and I would agree. I cannot agree less with Mr. Vineet. I mean, I myself is a votary for green power. So, but at the same time, it has to be environmental with the financial cost which we need to look at. Now, for example, KPCL alone has investment of about 35 to 40,000 crores. Now, what will happen to this 35 to 40,000 crores if we have to transition overnight? So it has to be a phased manner of transition from thermal-led power generation towards RE-led power generation, which already in Karnataka has started happening. For example, 50 to 50% of the generation as on today is coming from RE in Karnataka. And I'm sure other states in southern India are also following the suit, and it will happen. But now the point is that if you look at, one point I'll make. If you look at Germany, the country where you already have more than 50% of the generation coming from RE, they have scheduled phasing out of thermal power plants by 2038, which means 2040, which is close to about another 18-20 years from today. So now in India, we'll have to think about how we are going to handle it. Do we want to add cost of idling, or we would like to catch up with phased transition? That needs to be decided by all the state governments and central government.
Right. So before I come to you, Mr. Singh and Mr. Ramesh, I'd like to go to Mr. Jain. Everybody has decided that the future belongs to you. But how do you think that the balance can be struck between thermal and renewable?
You know why these topics are being discussed, and I bear the pain of KPCL and all the state utilities. I bear the pain of them. But the fact is, what has happened is all is a result that there is no demand today for electricity.
Yes.
The crux of the problem is not renewables, what we are trying to discuss. You have a 380 gigawatt of installed capacity in the country, and the peak demand of yesterday was not even 180 gigawatt. So you have got to double the installed capacity of a peak demand. So one, we have to see how we reach to at least 300 gigawatt as peak demand. You will not be discussing anything what you're doing today. Everybody will be happy. So the crux of the problem is that. Now coming to, okay, we have a problem in hand because, the planning was poor. Everybody thought generation was the biggest bottleneck in this country, and people went left, right, and center investing in thermal generation.
Not to forget the stranded power in the country. Don't forget, there's also the huge bulk of power which is stranded in the country also.
Yeah. What I'm coming to is, we did not match our generation with transmission, which we are now thinking. Secondly,
what is the cost of that lapse, Mr. Jain?
It's a huge lapse. It cannot be calculated. Let's be honest about it. But then I cannot be blamed for it. I think the people sitting in the parliament must think over it, as well as the utilities must also think. I think that they were a part of the planning. Coming back to another point. We are talking of one sun, one world, and one grid. Right. I have written in one of my tweets that let's talk of one nation, one grid first. Forget solar, thermal, everything. One nation, one grid. Once you have that, and if leaving the federalism aside and the politics aside, if you have one grid, then let us list out all the thermal plants in the order of their age. All plants which are more than 25 years need to be shut down, irrespective of the state.
So there's a social cost to that.
No, there is no social cost to it. I'm sorry, you are paying much more social cost because you are generating thermal. We don't even realize that. Germany put a cost
Exactly,
of
that was Germany's example that you're taking. Shut down plants which are old, but in a country like India where employment is a huge issue, sir, it has a social cost.
no, it does not have a, because renewables or other new thermal plants will compensate it.
Okay.
Please understand, when they can be used elsewhere. I'm not saying people should lose jobs, but just because you can't run inefficient plants and then you say DISCOMs are in loss. Of course they'll be in loss. 16% PLF, how do you run a plant? It's ridiculous. Okay, even if you have to do that, then I have an option. All along, we have been managing supply side projections. I have to supply so much. Technology can help us in making demand side projections very accurately, considering smart meters are coming in, considering you've got technological solutions available now. So you start projecting demand side management. And if you know that in next 30 days or next 60 days, my demand is going to be so much, I would rather shut down one plant completely rather than operating at 16 or 20 or 25%, because that damages the environment far more than not running it. You do the economics, you will not be losing more money. I am clear about it. So this is what has to be done countrywide. Because what we are trying to do is we are trying to find state-wise problems. That my problem is 16% and 25% and 50%. Let me be very clear that in times to come, all thermals will operate only at 55% PLF. I'm making this statement with some conviction. They will operate at least for next 3 years till such time our demand reaches to its next peak with EV vehicles and other demand and manufacturing. That is going to happen. Let's use technology. Let's use integration of the country. Use one nation, one grid, and ask, okay, let Punjab shut down one of his plants which is installed in 1975, or Karnataka which had a plant in 1980. Let's do that and let interstate power flow.
Mr. Jain, for KPCL or for RRVUN to do that, there will have to be bills moved not only at the state legislature.
It's a massive effort. I would take some quick comments from Mr. Ramesh and Mr. VK Singh. Both of you have been raising hands, but I want to also come back to Mr. Parameshwaran because he's not spoken in a long time.
Yeah.
So Mr. Ramesh and Mr. Singh, if you can keep your comments short and quick, we can just
thank you. Yeah, I'll just make one quick comment. This is with reference to the utility of coal for the future. I would strongly disagree with anybody who says coal is going to go away, because if you are going to ask Saudi Arabia to stop drilling oil, or Qatar to stop drilling gas, or Kazakhstan to stop drilling gas, it won't happen. Similarly, extraction or production of coal by India, Australia, Indonesia, and some of the European countries which have good amount of coal reserves, they're not going to stop. The only thing that needs to be done is, yes, we have to actually calculate the social cost of burning coal, which is about 2 times that of its actual price as of now. And secondly, we have to start looking at technologies like carbon capture and storage and sequestration at least. And that is going to the future. This is my idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Singh, you had a point to make?
Yeah. So I think in the same line as Mr. Ramesh has said, thermal cannot be totally done away. It can be reduced. That reducing, phasing out of thermal has to be gradual, controlled and structured manner, in a very calculated manner. You cannot go just offhand. And as a matter of fact, one nation, one grid, one frequency is already there. There is no physical boundary of the grid today. Now, it's a very complex technical issue. Phasing out is I was in Germany 2 years back and attending this Government of India sponsored course about balancing of renewable in the grid, integration of renewables in the grid. Let us think, I'll talk with the facts. Today, from fossil fuels, from thermal, you are generating more than around 2.5 gigawatts, 250,000 megawatts. Suppose all of it was to be phased away. What about the base load? How you are going to go? How you are going to step in? And how once the relevant solar is out in the evening, how storage backup is going to come in? So the balancing integration of renewable while controlling the grid frequencies, disallowing the collapse of the grid. That's a huge, huge challenge. It's not that simple. But we have to have a very end-to-end, complete, holistic program. Of course, there has to be phase. There is no. It cannot be disputed that inefficient and old thermal plants have to be phased out. Have to be phased out. But what comes in its place? Suppose solar is coming, so in equal amount, the storage hydropower plants, the pumped storage hydropower plants, and in pumped storage again you have open loop pumped storage power plants and closed loop pumped storage power plant. We may go to the extent of closed loop power plant where you are storing water into reservoirs and you are circulating that water. You fill it once and just compensating the evaporation losses you are making. And there are open loop, pumped storage power plants, which is really located on the river. That can be a thing. And there are hydros which have sufficient, the reasonable amount of pondage. Like there is 3 hours pondage right now the grid defines for peaking. You can have pondage power plants having 11 or 12 hour storage. So somewhere, in the midpoint, you have to calculate. It's a very complex technical calculation.
Mm-hmm.
So we cannot, and then we have to see.
Absolutely appreciate that, Mr. Singh. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. We cannot, do more. Mr. Jain, you have something to say? We'll quickly come.
I just wanted to say, I think so. Probably my statement was taken out of context. I have not said that thermal plants have to be shut down. I have said that all the old thermal plants, which are at least
that's what I'm
have to be phased out.
Yeah.
You cannot survive without thermal plant. That I know. You need a base load.
Yeah. So
that's why Government of India is coming out with RTC tenders, where you are saying that you give 49% thermal and 51% renewable. You bundle it and supply power as a RTC.
Yeah. So what I'm saying in a different context, but renewable induction is very welcome step. It has to be there. It has to come in. There is no denying the fact. But the only good source, I'm a strong votary of hydro, and hydro having huge pondage, hydro, having the pumped storage hydro, unless we are taking urgent steps, I don't know. I think as of now, how much battery capacity can supplement this, cyclicity, or maybe the intermittency and variability of renewables like solar and wind.
Mr. Singh, Mr. Jain is already smiling because he has the retort ready. He'll now ask you about land acquisition.
Can I
come to Mr. Mr. Parmeshwaran on this?
Yeah. So I'll take 1 minute.
Sure.
It's a very well said by Mr. Jain. So you raised the first point, what will happen with the coal? So Mr. Jain itself answered the point that already ministry is coming with the tender where they are looking for more thermal, 49% thermal. Recently, SECI has come with the RFP, which is going to be further extended with certain changes where coal linkage commitment is being asked by bidders. So 49% thermal commitment and 51% green co commitment. Number one. Number 2 points, Mr. Jain raised a very valid point. The plant which have already lived their life, we may consider to put those plants out of business. And third important point, if we read the study which been published by POSOCO under security constraint economic dispatch, so it clearly suggests at least PSC level, almost 48 power plants made a pool where they have made their own merit order, and based on that merit order, power was injected in the grid. So I would echo the point which Mr. Jain conveyed. So over to you, Sucheta.
I'll go to Mr. Parmeshwaran with that question, sir. What is your take on the strategic decision that India has to take? What should be India's stance when it comes to its Paris commitments vis-a-vis the thermal power that we already have in the country? How do we clean up coal?
My take is that, as Mr. Ramesh said and Mr. VK Singh said, we can't completely do away with the thermal plant as such.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be phased, and the old plants which are less efficient or more polluting, let us put it that way, have to be gradually phased out. But you can't be, really looking at a scene where you have total absence of thermal as such. Baseload is one thing which, you will have to look at. Baseload is being provided by the thermal plants, and we can't be doing away with those. That is my...
right. In fact, sorry, did I stop you from saying something? Please finish what you were saying.
Me? I think
Mr.
one
Parameswaran?
couple of more points. That's again, I'll of course it's at the cost of repetition. This I think all the renewables like solar, wind, their intermittency, variability has to be very, very closely studied. The load cycle in the grid, the generation cycle from the renewable sources, and the backup plan. Vis-a-vis battery storage, because solars, I think, unless they're backed with battery, or the pumped storage power plants or hydropower plants having huge storage, and then you do this proper optimum mix, and then gradually phase out the inefficient thermal power plants. That is the way ahead. That is how it should.
Absolutely right. I'll come to Rajiv. After this, it's already 5:25. We have time till 5:30, but we might just go over by 5 to 10 minutes.
And we must grow hydro because the life cycle cost has to be seen. Even if it coming apparently 6 rupees, 7 rupees, if you take it as a grid stabilization element, in Japan, there is something called capacity contracting. And to stabilize the grid, you have to have, you have to purchase from hydro and think that this is a grid stabilization cost. And that cost must be borne from that pool of the grid stabilization cost. Otherwise, if the grid security is lost, that's very highly complex technical issue. One grid outage will do away with all the cost savings. So the grid stabilization cost has to be subsidized towards hydro, because that is the strongest grid stabilization element. That will capacity contracting to be done by the grid.
You already have support from Mr. Parameswaran. Mr. Jain, you want to say something?
I would love to have hydro on the country's electricity map, but unfortunately the forces which have worked against deployment of hydro have overpowered that. Today a hydro project in country, especially with storage would take anything from 8 to 10 years to build.
Right. Absolutely. In fact,
lost it as an option until the Supreme Court comes in and says, okay, I'll go ahead and allow you to do hydro.
In fact, we have now got we have been having almost more than 400 people who have been listening in to us. 350 are still there, and we've got more than 100 questions from them. And which, if we ask, we can go until 6 a.m. tomorrow. And so let me come to Rajiv with a question on technology. Rajiv, in the beginning, when I set the context and we discussed, we said that there is a question of the processes, which Vineet had mentioned in his talk, that everybody has to go in for ERPs and other process improvements through technology. And we also spoke about the Denmark example, where the entire wind farm is managed by one person, right? So it's about automation. So there's a general, business driven by technology, and there are technologies that can help in that. What are the trends that you see in this, not just in India, but globally, in terms of how is technology helping business transformation or business transformation, not necessarily only digital transformation, but for generating companies? We can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
Bring the mic closer to you.
No, we can't hear you at all.
Say something.
He's on mute, I think so.
Is Rajiv, say something?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Alokesh. Last time I heard some comments that it was not clear. So am I clear now?
Yeah.
Absolutely clear. Better than before.
Yeah. Thank you, Alokesh. I think we're trying to, while the conversation is happening, I think it's just very, very strategic, right? So while it is absolutely phenomenal to hear Mr. Jain and all the senior generation leaders and heads about trying to solve a problem which is possibly a parliament discussion, and I'll limit my possible talk to a little a technology level. To your question specifically, Alokesh, what we are seeing is that while there are larger transformation, right, which is tool-based transformation, system-based transformation, which is automating certain processes which were manual to possibly computerize, what we call as. But transformational processes are something which we are seeing with newer technology enabled, especially in generation companies. What we are seeing now is the whole asset or the generation side, which are very, very proprietary products which are used, whether it's turbine in various organizations or a boiler. And these possibly assets are giving data which are proprietary in nature. From an automation and transformation perspective, what we've done is we are able to integrate multiple such products at backend, bring it, unify, which one asset can be 25 years old, another can be just 5 years old, and everybody is emitting data at different frequency, different proprietary technology. What we've been able to do transform is that have a unified view of their entire asset library, which is historical in nature, new in nature, and trying to address some of the questions which Mr. Jain also raised, at old power plants and old assets. And then that particular asset from a dashboard and unify room, you can monitor your entire landscape and control some of those assets and predictively manage that. Second, we are seeing changes coming in very micro innovations. I call it micro innovations because now in these times, people are looking at very fast turnaround times for quicker success, and people do not have possibly appetite for a 12-month to 18-month project. We are seeing micro innovations in areas like, very recent example is touchless invoice management. In very basic, in COVID times, the invoice comes through a courier to an organization, and they found that was the leakage point for COVID. And they wanted to absolutely do without any manual intervention, the complete invoice management in a PSU. And these are micro innovations that we are seeing. So an invoice is sent, it's physically scanned by unknown person, remotely it's scanned. Everything is processed till finance without any intervention of any manual. Only exceptions are sent online to the persons who need to overrule and decide on those. So some of these micro innovations are something that we are seeing globally. Major focus is on asset, which is asset maintenance again, and predictive. You're based on your historical analysis, you're able to predict that this machine is going to fail now, and it's better that you maintain it now at this time, and possibly reducing the unplanned downtime. This is where I thought that is our major focus from a generation point of view.
Mr. Ramesh, you had raised your hand. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, just a quick point, like with reference to the supporters for hydel power plants, particularly Mr. V.K. Singh and Mr. Jain. I had one more example to bring to this forum's notice. Basically, Brazil was a leader in having mini hydel power plants and hydel power plants for quite long. In the last 2 decades, Brazil has realized after its hydrological studies, that is, the levels of water have completely come down, and the new climatic patterns have completely made their hydrological, rather hydel plants redundant. So I mean, with the climate change being so apparent, I have a different view with reference to expansion and proliferation of hydel power plants. That's it.
As Alokeshda just mentioned, that we have
there you can have pumped storage power plants. That's it. It justifies the requirement of pumped storage power plants even more. And before the glaciers die up, let us make quick use of next 30 years window. They will not dry up overnight, and we reserve all fossil fuel for that period after that.
Right.
Jain also wanted to say something.
I agree with what Mr. Ramesh has said, but what I want to say is that Brazil has predominantly rain-fed hydro plants. Fortunately for India, you have glaciers melting, and that flow has always been consistent so far.
20-30 years.
But like Karnataka as a state or Andhra as a state, they all have rain-fed and they have faced trouble. I agree with you. And Brazil had a problem because Brazil cut the Amazon forest like nobody's business. And therefore, their climate changed dramatically. So for those, I don't think so we have a solution. Then renewable is the only solution.
Right. We had over 400 participants, as we mentioned before, and there are over 113 questions now. There's one question, Mr. Ponuraj, directly for you. This question is coming in from Sandeep. He's asking that you spoke about the thermal power plants being shut there. Was it a voluntary shutdown? Is the question.
No, of course not. I mean, we can't voluntarily shut down. It is forced shutdown, or it is called as RSD, reserve shutdown, because of lack of demand. What happens is that whenever RE, I mean, right now, though we have one nation, one grid, I mean, grids are connected, but still the operation of the power plants and then merit order dispatch is state-wise. So because of that, the plants which are inefficient are being operated in certain states, and the plants which are efficient are being closed down because of the state-wise MOD, merit order dispatch. So because of that, in Karnataka, since we have 60% RE source, coming from RE source generation, wherein the RE has must-run status, we had to back down our thermal power plants. So it is a forced shutdown. And probably, if I have to tell you, give you the data, that the RE share in the country, if we look at, has grown from 2016 at around 6.62% to 9.9%, around 10% in the country. Whereas in the same period, if you look at in Karnataka, it has raised from 14% to 30.75%, which is almost 10 times that of the the rest of the country's growth in the RE. So it is because of high RE penetration, we had to shut down. In fact, not only thermal power plants, all our hydel power plants this time I have a huge, Karnataka is the highest state with highest hydel capacity, 3,600 megawatt we alone have. And all hydel units are also shut down during those 2 months time, because we didn't have enough demand.
Right. So, we are at the end of this discussion, but I will have, 1.5 questions for all of you. And I'll start with Mr. Parameswaran. There is a question asking a specific question to thermal and a strategic question. I will ask both of them together because there is no time to ask two separate questions. So one, the specific to thermal question is, how would you compare the efficiency of thermal power plants of 20 years ago to the ones today? How much more efficient are the modern thermal power plants compared to the ones 20 years ago? That is a simple enough question for you. But the more strategic question...
actually, not to me, not to possibly, maybe to thermal generators, because Mr. Punaraj would like to.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Oh, that was for thermal.
Yeah.
I went to the wrong person. Okay.
Correct.
So, Mr. Punaraj, you want to answer that question again?
Yeah, I will just answer in one sentence. The thermal power plant, which was set up about 20 years back, consumed roughly about 0.7 kgs of coal to produce one unit of power. Today, the new unit which we have set up is consuming about 0.45, almost about 300 grams difference. So we can see almost about 50 to 60% reduction in the coal consumption. So which is about, so roughly about 50-60% efficiency improvement is there between the old plant and new plant. However, I would like to make it very clear, when it comes to phasing out thermal power plants, it is not as simple. As Mr. Sunil Jain would make it out to be. In fact, if I was not in this position, I would probably have, been more emphatic than Sunil Jain himself, right? But however, having been in here, we have to calculate three costs, very clearly. One is that cost of idling the power plants, then the cost of creating the new RE capacity to replace that, then the cost of manpower redeployment or retrenching the retrenchment cost. All these things, if you put together, probably it will be very difficult to take a decision as Mr. Sunil would like to take. But I would definitely agree with Mr. Sunil that we need to be so emphatic in replacing the polluting thermal power plant with the renewable energy. There is no doubt about that. But will it be that easy? In that part, now if you look at the debt which is there on each of the assets created for thermal power plants, it is roughly about the debt component is about 60 to 70% of the net worth itself. If you want to phase it out, if you want to just scrap it, then you will have to pay for REC, PFC, and then the commercial banks. Otherwise, you will be adding to the already high NPA which is there in our financial market. So you want to go for a kill? I mean, that is the no question which you need to answer.
Maybe I'll answer that. What I have said is you have to phase out all old thermal plants which have outlived their life and their fixed cost is almost negligible. The problem with that, with the state governments, is that they all want to run those plants because the cost of generation is very low over there.
Right.
The
Exactly.
fixed cost is negligible.
Correct.
There is a
Exactly.
question. Yeah.
So if you want to phase out that, there is no question of PFC, REC or anything of that sort. No, it's only the variable cost which you lose. And that you don't lose because you don't run.
We can go on with that debate really between the two of you. That's for another day. But before that, there's another question. This is specifically for NHPC and Hero Future Energies. It's an audience question. They're saying that the country has a strategic focus on renewable energy. But what are the three things in which you would want policy intervention? Just three things. The person who's asked the question has already listed out one issue, which is how states have been reneging their contractual obligations. So he's asking you for just three things in which you want policy intervention. I'll go to Mr. Parmeshwaran of NHPC first.
See, as it is, the HPO is now already, sort of moving, and hopefully HPO will take effect, and the hydro will be, considered as a renewable power, and hydro power will be obligatory for the DISCOMs to be buying those. So the government is taking steps. Yes, that is there. But at the same time, the intermittency that we are talking about with the renewables, we would need, I would rather not agree to Mr. Ramesh saying that, hydro plants would not be required, in the sense that, because of the example that he gave about Brazil. Because, in intermittency, the ramping up requirement, the ramping up, ramping down, hydro is the best suited. And I would rather think, with the hydro plants, we need hydro plants for the grid stability to happen, because otherwise we'll be landing up into problems which we'll not be able to address. Because we are going into renewables in a big way, but hydro plants are also essentially required, and storage hydro plants are required, which we would maybe, the policy intervention, the enabling infrastructure, the flood moderation costs, the infrastructure costs, these are things which I would look for from the policy by the government.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mr. Jain, you'd like to answer that question from the which came in from the audience?
You're asking me very difficult questions.
Just you have a list of 10, then just choose the top three, sir.
No, I will answer this in only three. What I want from the government is, please give me a 5-year policy. That is one. Without changing that 5-year policy, I want that 5-year policy, fixed 5-year policy. You can't change it. And after that, the next 2 are, leave me alone, leave me alone. I'll do the rest.
Very difficult ask from you, very demanding, Mr. Jain. Mr. Ramesh, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. My point of saying that we should not, it was not that we should not set up idle plants.
Mm-hmm.
It should not be a situation because we are very apparently clear that our rainy season for 4 months has shrunk to 1 month. So the typical hydrological studies and climatological studies have to be taken up before.
Mr. Ramesh, I would like to just say, the Himalayan rivers are not monsoon fed; they are snow fed.
No, I'm talking the rest of the country also.
Yeah,
apart
that
from
is true.
just Himalayan, and Himalayan you have issues of geology also and seismic activity.
We do have issues, notwithstanding the issues.
So not just idle. You can, if you are really looking at storage, you also look at battery storage. You also look at the aspect of gas, wherein on international parlance it is said oil is money, gas is politics. If you are able to solve this politics issue of gas, then probably we'll have a better peaking power also.
If you solve the politics issue, then power sector would have been a different sector in India, isn't it?
For India, of course, power is politics.
Power is politics and politics is power.
Power,
Yeah,
yes.
It works
I
both ways.
understand.
And I'll come to Vineet. You started off this whole discussion, and I'd like to come to you with a small question on renewables. The growth in renewable has been quite phenomenal the past few years. As an observer of this industry, do you see renewables? I think there was a slight bit of a blip in the growth in the past 1 year or so. Do you see renewables continuing this momentum of growth in the near term, and this target of 40% by 2030, which we think is like a walk in the park? And I'm telling you why I'm asking this question. In the year, about 3 years ago, I had a discussion with CEOs on India's $5 trillion GDP target, which was supposed to be done by 2022 at that time. Right now it's gone back to 2024, and it will probably be pushed back even more. But at that time in 2022, the CEOs on my panel had said that we just need to do what we are doing now. Kuch extra karne ka nahi hai. Just do what you're doing now. We'll just walk into $5 trillion. And the scenario has so dramatically changed now that we are like thinking of $5 trillion, how do we get there? But do you expect renewable energy to continue the growth momentum?
Yeah. So, Alokesh, my answer would be, summarized answer would be yes, pretty much yes. Because reason being what we are seeing, but there are certain contours also which we need to address. Recently, some states came up with PPA back out. So those kind of things will really hit the sentiment in the market. If those kind of sentiment carries out in the market, then it would be difficult. But apart from these kind of incidences, if we see how India is moving ahead now, recently we know that 8 gigawatt already awarded to Adani, out of which 2 gigawatt solar cell production capability India is developing in-house itself. So those kind of interdependencies, which earlier we were trying to dependent on other country itself, are creating within India itself. So with this, I personally see, and my personal belief, that India will take up that target itself.
All right, thank you. I would request my colleague Suchetna, who's been such a powerhouse of a moderator today, to give a summary of what we have discussed.
Thank you very much for the compliment, Alokesh. It was a great discussion simply because we had great panelists. So again, heartfelt thanks to all of you for taking the time out. As Vineet said the context right at the beginning of the discussion, there are a few key trends that we're observing, trends that will shape India's power sector for the future. Our climate change accord and our commitments to it has been perhaps the biggest watershed moment for setting the tone for the power sector in the next 10 years. Add to that grid parity. Then there is, of course, the global issue, the global phenomena that we see, which is technology adoption. Power sector is no different. Technology perhaps will change the sector for the better in the future. Mr. Sunil Jain mentioned, and most of you would agree, when he talks about policy stability in a country like India, policy flip-flop has been a constant feature here, especially since 2011. That has to stop. Mr. V.K. Singh, you pointed out very subtly to how the power sector will have to be left alone by politicians, perhaps another sentiment that most of you will share. Add to that is perhaps the hope that the amendments that are being proposed to the Electricity Act, all of them, if looked very carefully, you will see the government is perhaps making the first few steps towards pulling itself from the very interventional role that it had in the power sector. If all of those go through, perhaps it will be a very different power sector that we will all wake up to someday. With that, I'll give it back to Alokesh Das, sir. Please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Suchetna, for summing up so succinctly. And thank you all the panelists for joining us. I will wind up with one question from the audience, which we could not ask. Out of the 131, we managed to ask 2, and the others are still there. But this question you need not answer. You can just go back home with it and just mull over it, maybe sleep over it. This question is asked by a person called Devashish Mohapatra, and he's saying this one is for the generators. Whether you produce power conventionally or non-conventionally, as in RE, your survival is dependent on the upward revenue stream, mostly from the end consumers of the DISCOMs. So how are you planning to circumvent that revenue risk of the DISCOMs, with the government support to the DISCOMs also facing challenges, and the DISCOMs on their own also facing challenges in being financially sustainable? Is a blackout inevitable? Don't answer it. think over it. Of course, the blackout is not inevitable, but it is a vicious cycle. And how do we get out of it? We will depend on leaders like yourself and the ones in Parliament to find lasting solutions to these. Many big thanks to SAP, Rajiv, and your team for giving the Economic Times this opportunity to hold this discussion. And thank you to all the panelists, Mr. Parmeshwaran from NHPC, Mr. Ramesh from RRVUN, Mr. VK Singh from NIPCO, Mr. Ponuraj from KPCL, Vineet from EY, Mr. Sunil Jain from Hero Future Energies, Rajiv yourself from SAP. Warm thank you to Suchetna, my co-moderator, and all of you. Stay safe, stay home, stay well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was an absolute pleasure having you here.
Thank you for joining late.
Thanks, Suchetna.
It's a, sir, you made up for that coming late. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.